Mike Holmes. I was the reactivation officer for Battleship New Jersey. I was 17 and I had been appointed to the Merchant Marine Academy, and my congressman called me and said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Congress just said the Merchant Marine Academy has to admit the first female applicants to the Academy, and they held a lottery and your name was pulled and you're no longer appointed to the Academy. But there's a good state school right across the river from it. Would you like to go there? And I said, I didn't know anything about New York Maritime. I had only applied to one school. And I said yes. So 3 days before indoctrination, I was summarily whisked off to New York Maritime. And so I joined the Naval Reserve at that point, worked as a machinist mate on board the USS Power, DD-839, and the William R. Rush, DD-714, which were stationed at Fort Schuyler at the Reserve Center, and I did that for 4 years while I was at school. I also did my Merchant Marine training on the Empire State V, which was the school ship, and also every one of our vacation periods I was at sea with Merchant Marines such as Aramco and other merchant vessels. I learned a lot during that time. When I graduated, I had a reserve commission, and I decided at that point that I needed to make a choice of whether I was going to activate my commission or whether I was going to stay Merchant Marine. I decided to go the Navy way, and was brought into the Navy at that point in August of '78, and transitioned very quickly into the Navy aspect. And my first ship was the McInerney, which was a brand new frigate, and I was commissioning crew on the McInerney. Was the first RAS system officer in the Navy. We came back in and cut the hull, cut the stern off the ship, put a new stern on, and we became the test platform for the Lamps Mark III, the SH-60 Bravos. While I had been in school, I also had gotten with Aramco, I had gotten my private pilot's license with helicopters, so I was already a rotary from the private side, so I was perfect integration for that. The recovery assist securing and traversing system became, what we did on McInerney became the primary site for all the ships in the DDGs, the cruisers, the CG-55, which I was on later on the Leyte Gulf, all the ships that followed, so that we could then do helo operations up to Sea State 5. Some of the pilots allowed me to get some stick time with the Bravos, so I was able to do that, but it was good for the integration aspect of that, because I was able to cross-deck what I knew from the merchant side, seamanship aspects of it with dealing with helicopters trying to land on a pitching rolling deck. McInerney went out in the foulest of weather. They used to laugh. There was a big news article in the Mayport based newspaper about as the Perry comes in, because there was a hurricane out off the coast, McInerney goes out, and we would regularly in 30-foot seas trying to conduct helo operations to see exactly what the mission envelope could achieve with the RAS system and with the SH-60s, which we did, and became the stalwart for the Bravos. We became the destroyers, and all that took it on became the hunters again instead of the hunted. It was really good when we were down in Gitmo and Andros Island and doing workups. We could actually locate real time using the ship's computers with the helos for the first time in years. We could get real-time integration for attack profiles on submerged submarines. Then I went to the battleship as my next tour of duty, and in that realm, my captain was very entertained with the fact that one of his officers was selected by Admiral Fogarty to be on the battleship. With my Merchant Marine background, Admiral Fogarty had, as he told me, knew I knew old steam plants, having come from the Merchant Marine, and he saw my record and grabbed me. And my detailer, when I went to see him in Mayport, said, "Oh, I've got your orders right here." And I said, "Well, isn't this supposed to work that I have a dream sheet and we talk about where I'd like to go?" And he said, "No, I think you're going to enjoy these orders." And I said, "Wow, that's sort of presumptive." And he handed me the orders, and I went, it was 3 lines signed by Admiral Zek at the time, and it said, "You're being posted as reactivation officer on the battleship New Jersey." And I was pretty happy about it, I'll say, because in that day and age, we were coming forward with the 600 ship Navy, so we were going to be the primary asset to lead the 600 ship Navy under Secretary Lehman. In late 1980, I got my orders to New Jersey. I reported in early '81 when the ship was just starting to come down to Long Beach for reactivation. I was in charge of working with the shipyard on what areas needed to be reactivated, how we would interface the new equipment into the ship, such as the Tomahawks, the Harpoons, the close-in weapon system, and putting them into the mix. What areas needed to be redone, especially things like a lot of stuff wasn't laid up properly in late '69, or over time just had gotten to the point where it needed to be replaced. An example was we had steam-driven pumps for the reduction gear oil in the main engines. Well, the first time we put steam to these pumps, they blew apart and the blades went everywhere in the engine room, and we had to work with Washington to find an appropriate electric pump to put into place, and the AORs were just being built, the Detroits, the Sacramentos, and so we were a higher priority, so we were able to procure all of their main lube oil pumps to go to our main engines. So that's what I did as a reactivation officer. Upon commissioning, I took that hat off and put on the repair officer hat for the ship. And so I was then in charge of repairs and repair work packages throughout the first 3 years of the ship. The ship was recommissioned with a mandate by President Reagan that we not exceed $270 million. So we were looking for anywhere we could find World War II equipment, even if it had tubes, because a lot of the stuff still had tube technology with it. So we would go down to Point Loma, we would take World War II vintage equipment out of there, start looking at what we got from that. Yeah, we can keep that for working with electronics and all that was still on board. But one of the things, well, I'll get to that later, but when we left Long Beach, we were on a 3-month East Pack where we fired the Tomahawks and our first Tomahawk launch into Nevada. And then we were home for a few days, and then we were off to our 3-month West Pack, which turned out to be an 11-month special cruise to Nicaragua and to Beirut after that. I sort of was accelerated in my promotions. I only spent less than a year as an ensign. I spent 8 months as a JG when I got promoted to LT. I made lieutenant commander coming off of the New Jersey. Jersey was probably of all my tours, it was probably the most worthwhile of my active duty careers. I think that the Jersey, all of the officers and chiefs were hand selected by Admiral Fogarty. He was captain at the time, but he was actually the second CO. The first CO we never heard the full story about why the first commanding officer was released from the position and Admiral Fogarty was put in place. He was the right officer for that position at the time. Well, I call him Admiral Fogarty because he was promoted, while he was aboard, he was promoted to Admiral but couldn't put it on until the day he left the ship. So when he left the ship on the 15th of September in '83 on our way to Beirut, he became an admiral on that day as he was transferring off on the 46th that I was launching off the flight deck. He got piped off as Admiral Fogarty, so we kept it sort of, and just like I call Admiral Milligan Admiral because I knew Admiral Milligan for a lot of years after leaving the ship. He was a true combat warrior. Admiral Fogarty was very good in a position for Secretary Lehman and for President Reagan because he was the right face. He had very good political connections to bring all the battleships out. We were the lead ship. Battleships are back was our motto, was on all of our nameplates. The battleship is back. And so we led the charge. We brought back, we had a Master Chief boiler tech that we brought back on active duty so that he could teach the boiler operations. We had a gunner's mate that was 68 years old, Master Chief, that was brought back to teach us how to fire the 16-inch and handle the 16-inch guns. It was truly a good integrated effort at pulling together resources we needed so that when we came out, we were a real challenge to our opponent. We were really good firepower for freedom, going out showing the flag. Everybody wanted to come see the New Jersey. I could get any work done in the world for a ball cap and a lighter. Admiral Fogarty at the start, Admiral Milligan afterwards, kept me well supplied as a repair officer with both. So any port I came into, just a few ball caps, a few lighters, and work got done on the ship. It was really pretty cool. Part of the lead for the 600 ship Navy to bring back a different type of battle group. The battleship battle group was created. We not only had aircraft carrier battle groups, but now we had a battleship task force that could go anywhere with long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles, and that was one of the biggest integration efforts, was putting the Tomahawks in. It became, our ships only had a 60-mile range for most efforts because of the harpoon limitations. This now gave an extended profile for surface ship warfare. And that was what Secretary Lehman had been preaching. President Reagan really enjoyed that because it did make our adversary at the time, the Soviet Union, it really brought them to a screeching halt as to how they were going to address it. They were only addressing carriers. Oh, now you got to address not only carriers and submarines, but now you've got this surface battle group that can steam very quickly anywhere. Most people don't realize that when we were on our sea trials, we did 39.5 knots for 4 hours. And we left all of our escorts way over the horizon. And after the 4 hours, we slowed down to about 5 knots and waited a couple hours for them all to catch up, just because it was the limitations of the plans. We had sort of digressed a bit and weren't thinking of the challenges ahead for our Navy. We had allowed it all to erode after the Vietnam era, and it was slowly coming back to being warriors again. We had a great patch, the Surface Warrior patch. It showed coming from the subsurface, the surface, and aviation all integrating together with the surface warfare. And it made us feel like we were part of the equation again in the surface community. We were the only ship, when we arrived off of Beirut, we did 27 knots from Cologne, Panama to Beirut. Non-stop, no escorts. It was just, we got our escorts once we got into the Mediterranean. The only time we slowed down was the change of command on the bow up to New Jersey. The entire crew in whites all the way up to the 011 level. Admiral Fogarty was relieved by Admiral Milligan on board, captains at the time, and it's the only time I ever used my officer's chin strap, because we reduced for an hour to 15 knots, and that's when we held the change of command with 15 knots, and then we right back to 27 to Beirut. But once we got to Beirut, they said, "Oh, there's a repair officer, a repair department on the battleship. We can release the tender," which was the Puget Sound. She can go back to Gaeta, and the battleship can take care of all of the needs of our small boys that are there as well. Well, we were only supposed to do a 3-month East Pack and a 3-month West Pack. Nobody loaded us out for an extended deployment. So then we had to start getting crafty. So we used the Israeli Defense Forces to help us with a lot of repair stuff coming in and out. And then the bombing occurred there were multiple bombings. We had the Israeli compound bombing when we were in Alexandria and got recalled to the gun line. Then the bombing happened. Chief Gorszynski was killed. We almost lost 8 other sailors from the New Jersey as well on that day. They were transiting back home. They'd been transferred. They missed the daily flight, which was the CH-53 from Beirut International to Larnaca, Cyprus, and they had just left the barracks and were taking a walk around some of the Marine positions when the bombing occurred, and or we would have lost 9 sailors from the New Jersey on that day. I got recalled and got sent in with 10 of volunteers from the ship to help orchestrate the digging out of the Marine barracks. I still go to the reunions with the Marines down at Camp Lejeune every year because most of the Marines remember me from being there, from digging out the bodies, and it was a very difficult situation. I just helped one of our sailors that was in transit to us. He was on the EWO. He got sent into to help dig out. I just helped him through the VA, getting his PTSD resolved. But it was very difficult for us during that period of time, having lost Chief Gorszynski in the bombing. And then from then on, we weren't allowed to fire for the longest period of time. They used aircraft. There was a rumor through Congress that we couldn't be effective, that we couldn't really, if we fired, there would be a lot of collateral damage. It was not really backed by any facts. Then finally, they did allow us to fire in December. It was only 8 rounds that first time. But then by February, we fired 288 rounds at Syrian missile and gun emplacements that were on the backside of in the Bekaa Valley, in the backside of the Shuf. And we used armor-piercing rounds to crumble the mountain down onto those sites that were shooting at all of our F-14s and A-6, A-7s going through the Bekaa when they were mapping terrorist movements there. We fired 1 Tomahawk during my time, and that was off of California. We fired 1 Harpoon, which is off of the Philippines, and sank an old World War II US Navy LST from the Philippine Navy. We fired the 16s, the 5-inch, and even 50 cals. We had small boats that came out at us because we were only 1.5 to 3 miles off the coast, doing 3 knots back and forth for months on end. The only time we ever accelerated was to go out and pump and dump 12 miles off the coast in the middle of the night, and then we would be back, and then we'd spend a week just going back and forth. It was tiring duty, especially for the engineers, mind-numbing for the combat systems guys, because they were always triangulating, targeting, but never allowed to fire. And it got to the point that we were really wondering, why are we still here if we aren't allowed to be able to be used? And we keep losing aircraft going in, trying to keep the Hezbollah and the other warring factions that were trying to destabilize the Lebanese armed forces. The crew was undecided as to what they really felt about it. We used to have what we called midnight madness. The Syrians would resupply every night. You'd see the trucks if you were up in the top at Souk El Garb, which was the only LAF strong point in the hills. You would see the trucks coming up with their lights, and those were the rearming coming from the Syrian forces. And if you had shot off all your ammunition, they would give you new ammunition. If you hadn't, they would pass you by. So every night at midnight, knowing that the trucks would start making their run at 2 o'clock in the morning, they would just start shooting everything off. And as long as you destroyed something in another person's or another religious group's area, it was considered a good night, a victory for your side. There were 42 different religious warring factions in Lebanon at the time. It was, there were some major players, but these 42 would realign themselves. Every day we would get an intel brief of these guys left the Druze militia and they're now siding with Hezbollah. Or these guys left here and they're now siding now with the government forces in the LAF. It was mind-numbing trying to keep track of all of that. But then when I remember the first day we fired, we had been at general quarters so many times, and we fired and it was complete silence in the ship. Just total silence. And all of a sudden we realized we just fired for the first time. And the cheering that then went up inside the ship from all the guys that weren't in the guns but were down in the decks was just amazing to hear. Finally, we were able to be used the way we were intended to be used. And it was one of those moments you'll never forget. It sort of gives me chills just thinking about it. War is something you never want to have to live through or do, but that is our job. That's what the President and the Congress tasked us to do, and we actually felt like we're now being able to fulfill our mission. And so after the bombing, we did quite a lot of fire. I actually relieved a Marine up on the O1 level outside my stateroom one day because he needed to go use the facilities. And while I was on that 50 cal, while he went to relieve himself, a small boat came out, and so I got the opportunity to fire on the small boat with the 50s, and then the 5-inch took him on, and there was nothing but splinters on the water after that. And then the Marine came back out, and he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, Mr. Holmes, you gotta be kidding. I missed it?" I said, "Yeah, sorry, Marine, you missed it." And he kicked himself to this day that he couldn't wait it out. I saved a couple of the shells because he came out and the deck was just littered. I used the box. And then his last question was, did you get him on target? And I said, yeah, I sort of got him on target because I was an expert pistol and rifle, so it was sort of, I'm easy able to gauge lead. I left to New Jersey on our return home from Beirut and went to the Merchant Marine Academy. I finally got there as an instructor and the executive officer for the naval unit at the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. So I started training young minds, and I opened up the door to the naval careers. In 1986, I put 47 officers from the school on active duty, including Marines, 2 Air Force, 2 Marines, 4 Coast Guard, and Senator Mark Kelly was one I commissioned when he was just a young middy. It got him into flight school, and he became an astronaut and became a senator. So I was Navy staff there, then I went to the Leyte Gulf, then I transitioned over to engineering duty officer because I had gotten wounded in Beirut, so I decided I wasn't able to go back to full-time at sea, so I went back and did engineering duty, and I had a nuclear degree, so I went to nuclear submarine repair. I was at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Then during the later stages of the 90s, during what we call the Colin-Powell reduction plan, Congress cut back on the number of billets available to the Navy, so I was on a med hold, so anybody that was on a med hold was medically retired. I walked out of, at that point I had gotten into the deep submergence for the Navy. I was a deep submergence qualified officer in the Navy at that point. I transitioned. One day on Friday I left in my uniform. I came back as a civilian federal service on Monday, and I spent the rest of my career doing deep submergence rescue, deep submergence vehicles, Sea Cliff, Turtle. I went and then transitioned into the Jimmy Carter, the Seawolf, Connecticut, and then I finally said in the last days of my career I wanted to go back to the surface Navy, see what they were like. I went back as chief engineer for the littoral combat ships and wound up finding out that nothing has changed in 40 years. Since I had left the surface Navy, it was still the same. We were battling the same problems, but I ended my career in September of 21 I figured at 64 years old it was time to retire and give it over to the new guys coming in, and so I retired and was piped off by Admiral Moten at NAVC headquarters, and started my civilian cruising career, and I've now just finished my 15th cruise since September of 21. I've just spent 16 days in Greenland doing an expedition.